My name is Stuart Love. I work for the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I'm the District Wildlife Biologist based in the Charleston Field Office, which is in Coos County near Coos Bay. My duties are with respect to managing any terrestrial wildlife in Coos County and the western portion of Douglas County. So that means that I get involved with big game issues, with bird issues, with any sort of wildlife that occurs in those two counties, or the western portion of Douglas County. Yeah, the average day in my job changes quite a bit depending on the time of year, but quite a bit of my time is spent interacting with the public on a variety of different wildlife issues, quite often working with people who are suffering damage from wildlife, generally big game in most cases. I deal a lot with hunters who are hunting in the local area and mainly in my district. I also deal with other agencies on a variety of different wildlife topics, providing comments for planning purposes or providing advice for research purposes, that sort of thing. Most of the time and most of my work is spent on big game here. And so a lot of the questions that I get and a lot of the issues that I deal with are related to Roosevelt elk, black bears, and black-tailed deer. I also deal quite a bit with issues related to birds. I have gotten reports of Bigfoot sightings on more than one occasion in the time that I've been here. I've been in Coos Bay for 17 years now. Generally, when somebody makes a report of something that they think might be Bigfoot, we'll take information on that. We have a computerized form where we would record unique wildlife sightings, so we would probably record the information in that. And then we generally keep that information pretty confidential, because for a person to come forward and talk to an official about something that they've seen, it takes kind of a leap of faith, and they've got to be able to feel confident that we're not going to distribute that information without their permission and that sort of thing. There have been quite a few reports that I've gotten over the years of Bigfoot. I have gotten one, maybe two in the last few years that I thought were worth taking a closer look at. One was south of Charleston, where some people thought that something had pushed a tree down next to their tent in the middle of the night. We did go investigate that, didn't find anything to indicate what had pushed the tree over, just that the tree had fallen over. But it could be that someone pushed it over. It was a night with no wind. I got another report one time in another community north of Coos Bay where a person thought that they had tracks around their house, and that the kids thought that they had seen something in a window. We did do some other background investigation into that, but really didn't come up with anything. It'd be really difficult to identify the pros or the cons of Bigfoot existing in the Pacific Northwest and in the forests here, because at this point in time, we don't know whether there is a population of them or if they exist. And if they do exist, then we don't know what role they would play in the local ecosystem. So I really don't know what the pros or cons would be. I think that if this animal does exist here, it would be a part of the ecosystem here and would play a role of some sort in that. What the state would have a stance on is, if it was determined that Bigfoot did exist in Oregon, specifically in Oregon, the state would have a position on just how the animal would be classified legally and what sorts of protections it would be given through that process. I do think that there's a possibility that something like Bigfoot could exist. I don't necessarily believe that it does exist. I guess I kind of come at it from the standpoint of anything's possible. In the wild, I think you'd have a better chance of seeing a Humboldt marten than you would Bigfoot. We do know that we have Humboldt marten distributed along parts of the Oregon coast, and the part of the Oregon coast that I work in has a relatively high population of those animals, at least as far as that population goes. And so your odds would be much higher seeing a Humboldt marten than a Bigfoot, based on my experience in the field. Personal opinion is that the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife does a pretty good job of taking information on things like Bigfoot and saving and protecting that information in the event that we actually determine that one exists. Whether or not I believe that Bigfoot exists, I don't think that it does. I've worked in the field for over 30 years now. I've worked in several parts of Oregon, spent a lot of time in a lot of habitats that people have reported seeing that sort of thing, and I've never come up with anything. All that being said, I really hope I'm wrong. If Bigfoot was discovered in Oregon and verified in Oregon, the agency that would have jurisdiction over that animal would depend on quite a few different things. The first thing would be, did Bigfoot get here as a result of humans bringing Bigfoot into the state? And if that was the case, then the Oregon Department of Agriculture would have jurisdiction over that animal. They have rules related to the importation, trade, or movement of non-human primates, and a permit is required for that sort of thing. If that was the case, if the animal was discovered in Oregon and the Department of Agriculture took jurisdiction over that, there would be some Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife rules that would pertain. The animal would be considered a prohibited species in the state, and that would not allow the trade or movement of the animal without a specific permit to do so. It also would not allow holding of the animal without a permit. So then let's say that Bigfoot was discovered in the state, and what was determined is that actually this is an existing there's an existing population of them here, and that the animal is an indigenous animal in Oregon. In that case, jurisdiction for management of the animal would fall with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife. The animal would be listed under the protected animals list through the Oregon administrative rules, which would prevent selling them, importing them, or moving them around the state without a permit. The next step then would be for an agency, probably Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife to start with, to try to determine whether or not there is a viable population of these animals in the state, whether they're reproducing here, what a viable population would be, what habitat might be used by those animals. And then depending on some of the outcomes of that, it's possible that some other agency or some other entity or maybe an individual could petition with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which is the federal managing agency, for that animal to be included in the endangered federal endangered species list, in which case a significant amount of protections would be afforded the animal. If Bigfoot was found in the state and identified to be living in the state, as you can imagine, it would be a big deal. There would be a lot of people very interested in it. Very quickly, people would start trying to identify habitats that it's using. That we would be trying to determine whether or not there are other animals in the state, whether or not they reproduce here. And if that sort of information was developed, in other words, we were able to identify habitats or habitat needs, we would be taking quick action to try to protect those types of habitats, especially if we determine that there really are very few of them here. I've worked for Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife for just over 30 years now, and I don't know of anybody within my agency that's ever reported seeing a Bigfoot or that thought that they had seen one. There could be some, but I don't know who they are or when that may have happened. There has been some research done, I believe, at Oregon State University, where there was a researcher there who may have thought that he found evidence of an animal such as this in the state. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife does take reports of all sorts of wildlife very seriously, even if there's no real evidence that the animal being reported may actually exist here, or that whether or not we actually expect that it exists here. We do take that information seriously and treat each report as a significant report. I have had people contact me at the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife office in Charleston and tell me that they believe that there is an existing population in the local area, particularly between, let me not say exactly where it is. Let me not say that. We've never found any information that supports that there is, but we also don't haven't found any information that proves that there isn't. I know I've heard of people thinking that are mistaking bears for Sasquatch. I've never I've never gotten any reports of Bigfoot or Sasquatch in my professional career that I determined was actually a bear. And that has happened in other cases in other parts of the Pacific Northwest. So occasionally in Oregon, we do have animals turn up in the state that we originally, or prior to that time point, didn't think existed in the state. One example that I can think of are sea otters. Sea otters used to exist in Oregon along the Oregon coast. We believe that they've been extirpated from the Oregon coast and that there is no established populations on the coast now. However, we have at times had sea otters turn up on the Oregon coast. We've had them turn up dead on beaches here. We've had them turn up alive in certain places. Wolves. Prior to the establishment of gray wolves in Oregon, we did have wolves occasionally turn up in the state. They were probably coming from some of the other Rocky Mountain states. And in fact, I think that in some cases we proved that was the case. So we do occasionally get things in Oregon that we don't expect or that we don't think are living here, and it turns out they are. I would say that in the state of Oregon, probably the two rarest mammals would be sea otters on the Oregon coast, because we only detect them occasionally, or wolverines, which will quite often, when they have been detected, they've been detected in the Wallowa Mountains in northeast Oregon, the Steens Mountains in southeast Oregon, and a few other places. And those animals are only detected once a year or less. A couple of animals that I've seen move into Oregon or turn up in Oregon in my career that I was really surprised to have do so. One was gray wolves. We now have a fairly robust wolf population in the state. When I first started with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, we had none that we knew about. And then sea otters is another one. There are populations of sea otters both north and south of Oregon, but none that we know of that exist in the state. And so to have those animals turn up here is really a treat.